Some time ago, I experienced a sudden financial setback, the complete drying up of freelance writing work, possibly connected to my inability to finish most of the dreary assignments. The result, I had to ditch my Manhattan apartment. Fortunately, I knew someone, and they turned me on to a virtually cost-free housing situation, far from the city, in a small village at the end of Long Island. I saw it as an unexpected boon, a chance to get away from the bustle, the struggle for my daily bread, and focus instead on my art. I had an idea for a novel, something ambitious, a big, sprawling thing with 4 or 5 parts, maybe even an appendix. I called it The Leveling Wind. My new living arrangement was ideal for the concentrated work it would take. A quiet space in a pastoral setting, filled with light. A quaint general store and post office were a short walk into town. There was only one problem: my mother. The cost-free housing opportunity was her condominium, and as luck would have it, she still lived there. At least until November, 2 months away, when she made the annual snowbird pilgrimage to Florida. In the meantime, she seemed determined to rattle me out of the cool disposition needed for writing, following me around the house, grabbing my half-eaten sandwich or unread newspaper the minute I left the room, or interrupting my relaxing after-dinner reading to bait me about some story on the news. Fueled by glasses of cheap Cabernet, I'd rise to the bait, giving a full-throated defense of gay marriage or the progressive income tax, my loud voice echoing back to me as a righteous howl, outrage gathering steam as it barreled toward the fat target of conventional thinking, only to be foiled at the last minute by her indignant cry, "People can hear you. I have to live here." That cycle played out routinely, except for a rare quiet conversation over dinner, when we'd take apart some Latinate word in the day's paper, or reminisce about one of the many murder trials she took me to as a kid, hoping, I think, to get me interested in the legal career she would have liked to pursue. Getting a warm feeling from these quiet moments, I'd venture into more risky territory, trying, for instance, to make her understand the concept of a literary novel, which was always met with a maddening and what I considered willful resistance, concluding inevitably with her reference to the woman in the end unit whose son had self-published a 200-page adventure, Dreams of Feta, inspired by his 2-week vacation in Greece. The mere mention of this amateur hour project always got me riled up. And soon we'd be arguing again about culture, politics, the definition of normal. Still, I felt a certain writerliness about the whole situation, because of Kerouac. Yes, Jack Kerouac, king of the beats, lived with his mother on Long Island, at the height of his fame. I was shocked to discover this. Neighbors said they usually spent the evening chasing each other around the house in a drunken screaming match, which was less shocking. When he died a few years later, allegedly passed out in front of the TV, not the worst way in the world to go, it seemed to me. It was in his mother's house in Florida. I felt validated by the thought of it. This was the writer's life. So I decided to patiently wait out my mother's departure and focus on developing the themes of my book, knowing that as soon as she was gone, I could get down to the actual writing. I was also thinking of the historical value of all the notes I was keeping, the scrutiny that might await each underlined word or fragment of an idea. The harvest metaphor was clearly no accident. I could hear some Tweety professor lecturing. Some afternoons I put my notebooks aside and imagined the life I could expect after publication. Even in its larval stage, I knew my book had the hallmarks of a cult phenomenon, and very likely something more, something era-defining. If I could just get the time and space to bang it out. It wasn't hard for me to picture some wintry morning when a journalist would arrive, photographer in tow, to profile me for a mainstream yet cutting-edge magazine. They might tag along on my visit to the quaint general store, where I'd engage in easy banter with the plain-spoken proprietor, displaying an obvious comfort, indeed an intuitive connection with the regular folk. All my daily errands, a stop for milk, a visit to the post office, would glow with significance, the commonplace routine of an all-too-rare talent. I could see the pull quote beside a black and white shot of a thoughtful man walking under snow-covered branches, the collar of his peacoat turned to the wind. I don't wait for the muse, the author says disarmingly. I lay siege to it. Sometimes I conjured up variations on another favorite scenario. The unannounced arrival one morning of 2 or 3 young women from Budapest, Prague, Barcelona, breathless acolytes who had somehow tracked me down in my self-imposed exile. They wanted nothing more than to meet and perhaps sleep with the uncompromising spirit behind the leveling wind. Reluctantly, I would grant them entry into my world, soon beguiling them with my high-flown yet refreshingly earthy sensibility. With European enthusiasm, they would share me for several weeks. As the weather turned colder and the skies grayer, however, and as my mother's proximity wore on me more and more, it became harder to keep myself afloat with these devices. In fact, I wasn't doing much more than hanging on, desperately counting the days until I would have the place to myself, when she announced that she was extending her stay another 2 months. Apparently, a hurricane had blown across Florida and torn off part of the roof of her winter home. With even more serious damage done to nearby houses, it would be some time before hers was repaired and ready to occupy. Within hours of hearing this, my back went out. Now I began to drink more, starting at dinner, during which I stared at my plate as my mother went on about overpaid school supervisors or a fee on her phone bill she'd never noticed before. I didn't even have the will to rise to her after-dinner baiting. Instead, I quietly seethed, melting into the couch and eyeing her with growing resentment as she cleaned her way around the room. Soon, I was struggling to keep my head above the rising waters of an incapacitating depression. My work on the themes of the book petered out, and I found myself looking out the window for long stretches of time, watching elderly neighbors trudge around the perimeter drive. In my worst moments, thoughts of suicide bubbled up. I considered how one might do it. Pills, of course, but what kind? Where to get them? How many? And then there would have to be a note, which would take some serious work. Any real thoughts of doing myself in were quickly detoured, though, by the knowledge of what it would do to my mother, and the image of her walking in one morning, dustcloth in hand, to discover the body. I realized that if I were ever going to kill myself, I would have to kill my mother first. Fortunately, I hadn't gotten too far down this line of thinking when she announced that she was leaving on time after all. The wise people in Florida emergency management had decided on a strategy of reverse triage, fixing the less damaged houses in the hurricane zone before moving on to more challenging cases. A week later, I was helping her into a waiting cab. With a happy wave goodbye, I bounded back to the condo, a lightness in my step. Within minutes, the muscles in my back began to unclench. I sat at my desk and began writing, working deep into the night, intoxicated by the creative adventure ahead. It felt as if everything in my life had led up to this. I remember the day I wrote the last few pages of the book. What a feeling of satisfaction it was. All I had to do now was get down the pages leading up to them. Which would be a lot of work, of course. But with the ending already done and several notebooks of ideas in hand, I was confident the rest of the book would practically write itself. I needed a change of venue, though. It came to me that one environment may be perfect for incubating a project, but another might be needed to let the thing grow. So I left for Florida. The weather up north was only getting worse anyway, and I found out that with the insurance money from the hurricane, my mother got a new flat-screen TV for the guest bedroom.